I, 28 male, spend most of my free time gaming online, and for 3 years I thought I had found a real friend behind the headset. We laughed, played, and trusted each other, until the day he disappeared, and I learned he never existed at all. And I submitted my last raid recap to our guild forum thinking the next weekend would be the same late-night run, with the same dependable partner I had played with for years, but when he did not log in, the familiar pattern started to crack. A routine offline light became days of silence, then small anomalies on the account, then a trail of transactions that should not exist. By the time I gathered the logs, cross-checked the handles, and followed the money through trading hubs, I had to accept a truth that felt colder than any game over screen. My online friend did not simply vanish. He had never been a real person in the first place. And I am a 28-year-old man who learned very early that the surest way to feel steady in a noisy world was to build rituals. Mine began with cartridges and controllers, and grew into evenings that started after work with a mug of coffee and a headset that still smells faintly like the plastic of a new device. I live in a small apartment above a grocery store on a street where the traffic drops to a hush after midnight. The place suits me. The glow of a monitor, a mouse that fits my hand like a familiar tool, and a squad of screen names that felt as consistent as neighbors. One of those names was Cypher. I first met Cypher during a cooperative survival game, where preparation mattered as much as reflexes. We were matched randomly for a rescue mission that required patience, and he impressed me immediately. He had an even tone, never tilted when things went wrong, narrated danger like a pilot talking through turbulence, and improvised solutions that never felt reckless. We wiped together more than once that first night and kept queuing. By the end of the week, we were running together most evenings. The friendship built itself. He sent me a private message with a link to a community he liked. I joined, and we began to migrate from game to game whenever a new season or release pulled interest. Cypher said he was 27, said he worked odd shifts while trying to teach himself programming, said he lived in a large city a few states away in a small place he shared with a younger sister who hated the sound of keyboards after midnight. None of that was unusual in the world we inhabited. The details felt right, not too tidy, not too messy. He did not push for personal depth. He was simply there when it mattered, and very good at the exact thing I valued most, which was showing up. We gradually layered on rituals. Friday night was a long session that started late and usually ran until the sky outside my window turned gray. Midweek nights were shorter. We tried nearly every major release for a few hours before going back to the main 2 or 3 titles that owned our shared attention. He taught me better positioning in a shooter. I taught him resource routes in a crafting sandbox. He taught me to bind a few skills to different keys to save my hands. I taught him to farm bosses without burning out. Sometimes we would simply idle side by side in a social area and talk about nothing, while other players ran by with names that were jokes and references from 100 different worlds. He never used a camera. That did not bother me. Most of my online friends did not either. He never shared social media. That also did not bother me. We both liked the wall that gaming put between our lives and the wider internet. Once my headset snapped at the hinge during a heated fight, and I went silent. The next day a small box arrived with a cheap but decent replacement and a packing slip from a generic parcel service. He said he had an extra and was not using it. I tried to send something back. He said not to. He said his sister monitored the mail and would roast him if a box with gaming gear showed up. It read like a joke between siblings. My days were ordinary around the shape of those nights. I work remotely in customer support for a software company. The job is patient repetition, punctuated by genuine puzzles that take real concentration. After hours, I run, cook basic food, clean on Sundays, do the laundry while listening to ambient music that smooths my brain. The guild became my second neighborhood. We shared dumb memes and very real grief when someone lost a parent or a job. Cypher was good at that too. He had the right words when I lost my grandfather, words that did not feel rehearsed, and he stayed longer that night, just idling in a safe zone while I tried to pretend the pixels could be enough. He never took more than he gave. He would gift me a small cosmetic item when I missed a limited window or cover a downloadable content pack when I was tight one month. He never asked for money, he never asked for a favor. If he had, maybe the alarm would have rung earlier. The timeline was long enough for it all to feel permanent. 3 years of reliable evenings writes a story into your bones. Not every night, not every week, but enough that if someone had asked me to list the constants of my adult life, I would have said rent, coffee, running shoes that finally fit right, and the name that lit up on the squad panel almost every time I logged in. The first break in the pattern was nothing. He missed a Tuesday and sent a short voice message later with a laugh about a power outage on his block. The next week he missed a Friday. He sent nothing that time. I assumed life. People have lives. The week after that, his status was offline every time I checked. But when I scrolled the public activity page for our main game, I saw that his account had handled a baffling number of trades. He had always been wealthy in games. He seemed to generate currency like he ran an invisible farm that never slept. I teased him once that he must have a second job hunting treasure, and he replied that knowing markets is a skill like any other. On that activity page, every day he was missing from our squad, the handle I knew bounced currency back and forth to a string of accounts that looked like randomly generated names. The pattern did not look like normal play. It looked like inventory passing through a line. Update 1. I gave it a week of benefit of doubt before letting myself worry. Then I did what anxious people do. I went back through old logs. I re-listened to voice messages. Without the comfort of his presence, small details that had felt like harmless quirks started to throw a shadow. In the earliest months of our friendship, he said he worked part-time in a warehouse while he taught himself programming. A year later, he referred to his day job as a help desk role. Another time, he told a story about a coworker at a grocery store who dropped a pallet of soda bottles in a stockroom. I had not noticed the friction in those details because the rhythm of our friendship was built on what we did together rather than what we said about our lives. I called the number he had used for voice calls through an app. It had been disconnected. I tried the email he had used to share a patch file for our abandoned mod project. The mailbox bounced. I checked our guild server and found direct messages from lower-ranked players asking if I had seen him. I posted in our general chat that if anyone had heard from him to let me know. One of the older members said he had seen the handle active on trading hubs moving large stacks of currency but never joining a squad. He assumed it was a bot. The word lodged in my throat. I began to search for his handle outside the games we shared. People tend to reuse certain shapes. If a name gets you through gates and past security checks long enough, you cling to it. Change a number here or a letter there, but keep the spine. I found dozens of variants scattered across old forum posts. Some posts were harmless, someone asking about guild rules for loot or arguing about patch notes. Others were flags. In a moderation log from a role-playing game I had never played, a moderator described banning a trader with a handle one character away from my friend for brokering small amounts of premium currency between newly created accounts. The date on that log was years before I had ever met him. When I read the writing style and comments from that handle, the cadence felt eerily familiar. Short sentences, dry jokes, a very specific way of using game jargon. That same day, a stranger responded to my general post with a private note saying he had bought discounted currency from a seller who turned out to be fraudulent, and that he recognized my friend's handle from the thread where the seller recruited resellers. He linked me to a small market site with a plain text interface where users arranged trades directly through a messaging app. I stared at the page until my eyes hurt. I did not want to believe that the person who had given me counsel at my lowest would also sell me out for a quick flip of in-game coins. But the facts were no longer quiet. I set up a folder on my desktop labeled with his handle followed by the word archive. I began to drag screenshots into it. Transaction logs, forum posts, old voice messages archived as audio files, a photo of the cheap headset box that had arrived that winter night with a barcode sticker from a parcel forwarding service downtown in his supposed city. I called the forwarding service and asked whether they would confirm if a particular label number belonged to a specific box during a specific month. The agent politely said they could only respond to law enforcement. I thanked the agent and sat in the quiet for a long time. I made dinner and did not taste it. At midnight, I put on my running shoes and jogged the empty streets until the question that had been tapping on the inside of my skull finally said its name out loud inside my head. What if there had never been a real person behind that handle at all? Update 2. When your brain finally accepts that your friend might not exist, you either shut the folder and walk away, or you climb into it and refuse to leave until the last paper is read. I climbed. I looked for the root not in personality but in economics. Video games are full of tiny markets. Every market that can be abused eventually is. A handful of titles let players trade with each other. Third-party sites act as meeting grounds. People with stolen payment cards buy gift codes or premium items and convert the value into currency, then pass that currency through chains of accounts until the origin is so muddy that a buyer feels safe enough to take the risk at a discount. This is not news to anyone who works security in the industry, but it was new in the way a lightning strike is new when it hits the tree you have walked past for years. I found a public chat server dedicated to market arbitrage in games. It was a thicket of jargon and swagger. I searched the archives for my friend's handle and found it mentioned by users who bragged about moving stacks of coins in our main title. The mentions were not direct, but the phrasing matched his private jokes and old tips he had given me about auction houses and timing. A user posted a short guide on laundering value that read like a checklist. Convert stolen funds into gift codes, redeem codes on fresh accounts, move items into a waiting storage account, sell to a retail player at a discount, get paid through a payment app under a throwaway identity, repeat. At each step, risk is shifted away from the origin. I recognized part of that flow from the activity logs I had captured. The storage accounts my friend traded with were often newly created. Their names looked like the random output of a password generator. They traded only with him, and with other similar names. A few hours later, the same stack of items would be resold to an ordinary player at a bargain. I was not the first person to map this. There were posts from frustrated players who had been banned after buying cheap currency that later got clawed back by developers. There were pleas for refunds that went nowhere, because the first theft had occurred with a cardholder far away from the game itself. My stomach turned when I realized that the generosity I had always admired in my friend might have been funded by a constant stream of harm to people who had no idea their card had been used. I wanted to believe there had been two people inside him, the friend and the operator, and that the operator had infected the friend slowly. But the more I read, the more the operator looked like the only real shape, and the friend looked like a mask that improved conversion rates. I went back to voice messages. Without repeating them verbatim in my head, I noticed something I had ignored for years. There were very slight differences in the way he pronounced certain words. People have telltale vowels that stay with them through microphones in rooms. His shifted. It was subtle, but the timbre of the voice and the breath patterns did not always match. Sometimes he rushed to the ends of words. Sometimes he clipped them. I remembered 2 nights when he said his old microphone was dying and he had to swap to a backup. It now felt like different people rotating through a role under time pressure. On a Sunday afternoon, I opened the half-finished mod project we had once built together, not to reminisce but to search. In an old script file he had saved under a boring name, there was a comment line with an email address that did not match the one I knew. I copied it into a search engine and found it had been used to register 2 accounts on a marketplace where people resold gift cards and downloadable content codes. Both accounts had been suspended for fraud. A cached page captured the seller description from one of those accounts. The writing style was painfully familiar. This was no longer about whether my friend had occasionally crossed lines to help himself in a game. This was about a machine that ate trust and spat out cash. I wrote a timeline that began with the first night we queued together, and ended with the day I realized the trades continued while the presents did not. I printed it and taped it above my desk. I stared at the blank space between the 2 most important dates and realized the blank space was the truth. The friendship had been a product. I had been a recurring customer. The mask had been optimized over time. The most unsettling part was that the mask had been very good at listening. It had mirrored my language back to me. It had learned which hours I was free. It had memorized my habits. It had built trust with consistent kindness that did not cost it anything. That is how you hold a client for years. In any business, even a criminal one. You show up, and you make the other person feel seen. When I finally went to bed that night, I dreamed I was standing in a crowded lobby in a game, characters streaming past me, and every one of them wore my friend's name above their head. I woke up with my heart racing, and a certainty that if I did not take this to someone with jurisdiction, I would never stop seeing that. Update 3. I wrote to 3 places the next morning. I filed a report with the developer of our main game through their fraud form. I sent an organized packet to a generic cybercrime tip line that forwards matters to regional investigators. I also emailed the parcel forwarding service whose label number I had captured from the headset box, not asking for sensitive information but asking whether there was a procedure for reporting suspected abuse of their service by sellers who remain anonymous. I did not expect responses. Within 2 days, the developer wrote back. The message was cautious, as those messages always are, but the content mattered. They thanked me for the detailed timeline, noted that the account handle I provided had been flagged many times over several years as a currency mule and facilitator, and stated that they had restricted several related accounts in recent weeks. They could not share personally identifying information, but they strongly recommended that I block the handle and any associated accounts I could identify, and they invited me to share additional evidence if I encountered new activity. Reading that confirmation felt like losing a tooth you had been wiggling for hours. Relief and dread in equal measure. A day later, a detective from a regional task force left a voicemail asking me to call back. When we finally spoke, he was careful and plain. He said they received many reports about digital currency laundering through games and that the patterns I described matched an ongoing investigation into a network operating across several titles. He emphasized that these cases are difficult because the financial harm is often several steps removed from the game itself, but he encouraged me to preserve everything. I asked the question that had kept me up at night. Was my friend a single person? The detective said that in their experience, personas like the one I described are often operated by several individuals who share access across time zones, using voice modulation when necessary, and scripts for common conversations to keep the personality consistent. He asked if I had ever heard background noise that sounded like public spaces rather than homes. I had. He asked if the persona had occasionally claimed a dead microphone or a bad connection at the exact moments when personal questions were asked. It had. He asked if the entity had ever delivered physical goods directly from a personal address rather than through a forwarding service. It had not. He paused then and said that while he could not confirm details of live cases, nothing in my description suggested a person with a life that matched the stories I had been told. He did not tell me to move on. He told me to make space in my mind for the fact that a part of my life had been filled by a character played by different people. After the call, I sat with the headset that had started this portion of my adult life and realized how heavy it felt in my hands. I cleaned my desk. I labeled my archive folder with the word closed even though nothing was truly over. I logged into our guild server and posted a neutral note saying that I had learned our friend had been involved in prohibited trading and that I would be taking a break from group play to focus on single-player titles for a while. Responses came in waves. Some were sad. Some were angry. One member admitted he had bought cheap currency from a seller with a name similar to my friend's and had been banned. He apologized to the group for not telling anyone sooner. I closed the window and stared at the desktop until the monitor darkened. I tried a single-player game to fill the space. It did not work. I went for a run and felt better, only while my lungs burned. I came home and wrote this. The story is not finished yet, because the account still moves currency daily like a heart that refuses to stop. The person behind it never existed, but the operation does. I will decide in the morning whether to follow the trail further or finally sever it for good. What I know now is simple and enormous. A voice can feel like a friend. A routine can feel like a promise. Neither is proof of a person. Update 4. The week after I shared the truth with the guild was one of the strangest of my adult life. You do not realize how much gravity a single name exerts in a community until it disappears. Some people immediately deleted him from friends lists, blocked the handle, and moved on. Others resisted. They insisted there must be a mistake, that he would come back and explain everything. One person even accused me of fabricating the story because I wanted to take over as raid leader. That accusation stung more than I expected. I had not wanted leadership. I had wanted companionship. The Discord filled with late-night arguments. Screenshots were posted, dissected, compared. Some players who had never spoken much suddenly became experts in trade logs. One person claimed to have old chat logs proving that he had once mentioned the name of a real employer. But when pressed, they admitted that the employer had never answered their email when they tried to confirm. It turned into a kind of digital seance, everyone trying to summon a ghost that had never lived. The detective called me back once to say that the operation was larger than he could describe, and that shutting down accounts was like playing whack-a-mole. Each time one handle vanished, another appeared. That image haunted me more than I wanted to admit. It meant that the version of Cypher I had known was both unique and replaceable, that the traits I thought were special might have been a script that someone else could wear tomorrow. That week I stopped logging into any multiplayer game. I could not stand the sight of other names floating above avatars, could not shake the thought that any of them might be actors in a play with motives invisible to me. I went back to running outside every evening, pounding the pavement until my muscles hummed with exhaustion. But even then, when I closed my eyes at night, I heard his voice in my head, that calm pilot's voice talking me through turbulence. It was so easy to forget that the voice was never real. The week after I shared the truth with the guild was one of the strangest of my adult life. You do not realize how much gravity a single name exerts in a community until it disappears. Some people immediately deleted him from friends lists, blocked the handle, and moved on. Others resisted. They insisted there must be a mistake, that he would come back and explain everything. One person even accused me of fabricating the story because I wanted to take over as raid leader. That accusation stung more than I expected. I had not wanted leadership. I had wanted companionship. The Discord filled with late-night arguments. Screenshots were posted, dissected, compared. Some players who had never spoken much suddenly became experts in trade logs. One person claimed to have old chat logs proving that he had once mentioned the name of a real employer. But when pressed, they admitted that the employer had never answered their email when they tried to confirm. It turned into a kind of digital seance, everyone trying to summon a ghost that had never lived. The detective called me back once to say that the operation was larger than he could describe, and that shutting down accounts was like playing whack-a-mole. Each time one handle vanished, another appeared. That image haunted me more than I wanted to admit. It meant that the version of Cypher I had known was both unique and replaceable, that the traits I thought were special might have been a script that someone else could wear tomorrow. That week I stopped logging into any multiplayer game. I could not stand the sight of other names floating above avatars, could not shake the thought that any of them might be actors in a play with motives invisible to me. I went back to running outside every evening, pounding the pavement until my muscles hummed with exhaustion. But even then, when I closed my eyes at night, I heard his voice in my head, that calm pilot's voice talking me through turbulence. It was so easy to forget that the voice was never real. The week after I shared the truth with the guild was one of the strangest of my adult life. You do not realize how much gravity a single name exerts in a community until it disappears. Some people immediately deleted him from friends lists, blocked the handle, and moved on. Others resisted. They insisted there must be a mistake, that he would come back and explain everything. One person even accused me of fabricating the story because I wanted to take over as raid leader. That accusation stung more than I expected. I had not wanted leadership. I had wanted companionship. The Discord filled with late-night arguments. Screenshots were posted, dissected, compared. Some players who had never spoken much suddenly became experts in trade logs. One person claimed to have old chat logs proving that he had once mentioned the name of a real employer. But when pressed, they admitted that the employer had never answered their email when they tried to confirm. It turned into a kind of digital seance, everyone trying to summon a ghost that had never lived. The detective called me back once to say that the operation was larger than he could describe, and that shutting down accounts was like playing whack-a-mole. Each time one handle vanished, another appeared. That image haunted me more than I wanted to admit. It meant that the version of Cypher I had known was both unique and replaceable, that the traits I thought were special might have been a script that someone else could wear tomorrow. That week I stopped logging into any multiplayer game. I could not stand the sight of other names floating above avatars, could not shake the thought that any of them might be actors in a play with motives invisible to me. I went back to running outside every evening, pounding the pavement until my muscles hummed with exhaustion. But even then, when I closed my eyes at night, I heard his voice in my head, that calm pilot's voice talking me through turbulence. It was so easy to forget that the voice was never real. Update 5. 3 weeks after the disappearance, when I had stopped expecting closure, I received a private message through an alt account on the guild server. The account had joined months earlier but never spoken. The message was short. It said, "We never meant to hurt you." That was all. No greeting, no farewell. My pulse hammered so hard I had to stand. I read the words again and again. The phrasing was familiar. It used the same cadence as Cypher's old comfort messages, the same economy of words, the same quiet tone that always made me feel steadier. I knew it was him or one of them. Against my better judgment, I replied with a single question. "Who are you?" The typing indicator appeared for a long time, then vanished. Hours later, another message arrived. It was not personal. I stared at the sentence until the monitor blurred. Not personal. Of course it was not personal. To them I had been a client, a conversion channel, a resource. But to me, for 3 years, it had been personal every single night. I wrote back one last time, more for myself than for them. I said, "You stole a friend I thought was real. You built a person out of kindness and consistency and then left me with an empty chair. You may not think that is harm, but it is." There was no reply. The account vanished from the server the next day. When I checked the ID string against a public lookup, it had been deleted entirely. That silence was the final answer. Update 6. Months have passed since the disappearance. I wish I could say I never think of him, that I boxed the memory and shoved it into a dark corner. The truth is, stranger, I still hear his voice in moments of stress, narrating danger like a calm pilot, reminding me to breathe when the world tilts. It comforts me, even as it disturbs me. I know now that the voice belonged to nobody, or to many, and yet it still functions inside me like advice from an old friend. That contradiction is the hardest part. I rebuilt my routines. I still work my remote job. I still run at night. I still play games, but only single player or with people I know from outside the screen. I no longer accept new friend requests without a phone call, a video chat, some proof of existence. That might sound paranoid. To me, it feels like hygiene. The detective emailed once more to say the case had produced several arrests in another region, that accounts linked to the network had been seized, and that investigations were ongoing. He could not say more, it did not matter. By then I understood that Cypher was never a single person to be caught. He was a mask, a product, a performance. Masks can be burned, but they can also be remade. What matters is that I now know to look for the seams. Sometimes, late at night when the city goes silent and I sit alone at my desk, I open the old headset box that still sits in my closet. I run my fingers over the barcode sticker from the forwarding service. I imagine the anonymous hands that packed it, the chain of transactions that led it to me, the tiny cost of sending a prop that would deepen the illusion. It makes me shiver, but it also makes me resolve. If someone could invent a friend out of nothing but words and timing and consistency, then maybe I can invent new trust out of carefulness, honesty, and patience. Not every voice is a fraud. Not every name is a mask. The trick is to remember that proof of existence is not paranoia. It is a boundary. And boundaries, I have learned, are the only way to keep your real self intact.